There is a 7,570-meter gap in the history of mountaineering. Every peak above that height has been summited, and every comparable mountain has a recorded first ascent, complete with a date, a team, and photographic proof. Gangkhar Puensum does not. The reason is not extreme weather, difficult terrain, or a lack of capable climbers. In 1985, 2 expeditions arrived with government permits. The first spent days trying to locate the mountain because the maps were wrong. The second never climbed at all. Their permitted approach route was physically impossible, so they fished the valley rivers instead. 3 more teams attempted the climb. None came closer to the summit. Then, Bhutan closed the mountain. Not because of weather or politics, but because of what the communities below believe is up there. So, what exactly is on that mountain? Before we get into that, if you're new here, subscribe. This channel breaks down the hidden forces behind stories like this. Let's start with the numbers. Gangkhar Puensum rises to 7,570 meters, with a prominence of 2,995 meters, meaning it's a significant standalone peak, not a subsummit attached to something larger. It stands higher than anything in Europe or the Americas by an enormous margin. Higher than Aconcagua, higher than Denali, higher than Mont Blanc by nearly 3,000 meters. 14 mountains on Earth rise above it, and every single one of them has been summited. Gangkhar Puensum is what remains. The mountain sits on the border between Bhutan and China's Tibet Autonomous Region in the eastern Himalayas. Getting anywhere near it from the Bhutanese side requires an 8 to 9 day walk from the nearest road, through jungle, high passes, and sacred lakes, into the Lunana district, one of the most remote inhabited places in Asia. The cartographic record of this region was so poor for so long that when the first Japanese expedition arrived in 1985 with government permits and a full climbing team, they initially couldn't find the mountain they had come to climb. The peak appeared in different locations, with different elevations on different maps for decades after it was first measured by a British Survey of India team in 1922. The mountain has 3 summits: the main peak at 7,570 meters, a subsidiary at approximately 7,532 meters, and a third at roughly 7,516 meters. That 3-summit structure matters more than it might first appear, and the reason sits in the mountain's name. Gangkhar Puensum is Dzongkha, the national language of Bhutan. Gangkhar means white peak or snow peak. Puensum comes from Puen, meaning sibling or brother, and Sum, meaning 3. The full translation is White Peak of the 3 Spiritual Brothers. Consider what that naming choice reveals. Everest is named after a British surveyor. K2 is simply the second peak cataloged in the Karakoram range. Nanga Parbat means naked mountain. These names describe geography, logistics, physical appearance. Gangkhar Puensum was named for the beings believed to live there. The 3 summits aren't geological features, they're residences. Bhutan opened to mountaineering for the first time in 1983, after most of the 20th century spent as one of the most isolated kingdoms on Earth. 4 expeditions attempted the mountain between 1983 and 1986. Bhutan closed that window permanently in 1994. 11 years, 4 teams, 0 summits. The mountain had already delivered its verdict. To understand why, you have to look past the altitude and into the architecture of the divine. Bhutan is the last independent Vajrayana Buddhist state on Earth. That distinction matters because Vajrayana is not the form of Buddhism most Westerners are familiar with. It incorporates Tibetan Buddhist traditions alongside pre-Buddhist animist practices and a detailed spiritual geography in which protective deities are not historical figures or distant cosmic abstractions. They are present, they have jurisdiction, they have neighbors. The specific category of deity relevant here is the Yul Laha, a territorial guardian spirit tied to a particular landscape. A Yul Laha doesn't govern the universe. It governs a specific valley, a specific watershed, a specific community. Its jurisdiction covers crops, weather, river flow, and the health of the people who live within its territory. The relationship is practical in the most direct sense. Respect the deity, receive protection. Disrupt the deity, and the protection fails. What fails with it is the harvest, the weather, the health of children, the safety of travelers on high passes. In Bhutanese spiritual geography, peaks above 6,000 meters are understood as La Kong, which translates literally as sacred residence. A La Kong is where a deity lives. This is not a metaphor. The 1994 ban on climbing peaks above 6,000 meters didn't invent that threshold, it found it. The altitude at which Bhutanese tradition says terrain transitions from human space to divine space had existed for centuries before any government wrote it into law. There is a concept in this tradition called drip, which means spiritual pollution caused by inappropriate contact with sacred space. A summit attempt on Gangkhar Puensum would constitute drip against the deity residing there. The summit is understood as the deity's body, or the innermost chamber of its residence. Standing on it isn't disrespectful in some vague cultural sense. It is a specific act of desecration with a specific causal consequence. The deity's protective capacity over the surrounding communities is weakened by the intrusion. The shield doesn't disappear immediately, but it's damaged. And damaged protection over a mountain-valley system is not an abstract theological concern. It manifests as floods, failed crops, illness, avalanche, and death in the communities below. The three summits compound this. Because the three spiritual brothers work as a system, each protecting their assigned territory, damage to one affects all three. A summit of the main peak at 7,570 meters isn't simply an offense against one entity. It attacks the eldest brother directly and destabilizes the protective architecture that all three maintain together. The communities in the Lunana and Laya districts, the high-altitude settlements closest to the mountain, don't treat this as mythology. Farmers make offerings to the mountain before the planting season, before long journeys. When illness arrives in a household, these are practical appeals to a practical authority, in the same way that a farmer elsewhere might consult a forecast before committing to a planting schedule. The mountain deity controls variables that determine outcomes. The offering is the mechanism for maintaining the relationship. This framing inverts the Western reading of the bond entirely. The question outsiders ask is why Bhutan is protecting the mountain. That's not what Bhutan is doing. The mountain doesn't need protection from climbers. The communities do. The Bhutanese position is that a foreign expedition standing on that summit would be damaging the protective infrastructure that the valleys below depend on for survival. The ban isn't a religious gesture, it's a safety regulation. The thing being protected isn't a geological feature, it's the people living in its shadow. Despite these warnings, or perhaps because of the challenge they presented, 4 teams attempted to cross that 6,000-meter threshold. None of them came close. The first Japanese team arrived in 1985, led by Michifumi Ohuchi, 8 climbers from the Himalayan Association of Japan. They were the first expedition to reach the mountain's approaches, which meant they were also the first to discover how badly the cartography had failed them. The maps were wrong, not slightly wrong enough that a team of experienced Himalayan mountaineers with government permits and a specific objective spent days trying to locate the mountain they had come to climb. When they finally found their line, they pushed up the south ridge and reached approximately 6,850 meters before the attempt collapsed. A lead climber developed severe altitude sickness. Multiple large avalanches hit the route during the push. The retreat was ordered. They were still more than 700 meters below the summit. Later that same year, an American team arrived. Philip Trimble led the expedition, and the team included Yvon Chouinard, the equipment manufacturer and climber, whose technical credentials were not in question. The Bhutanese government had restricted their permitted approach to the Chamkar Glacier. From that line, no feasible route to the summit existed. The team assessed the situation, recognized the geometry didn't work, and abandoned the attempt without establishing a single high camp. Their expedition report documents that they spent a portion of the trip fishing the surrounding rivers. The mountain didn't need to fight them off. The logistics did it first. The Austrians came in 1986, led by Sepp Mayerl, attempting to build on the Japanese South Ridge line. They reached somewhere between 6,300 and 6,600 meters and held that position for 21 days. The monsoon didn't break. The avalanche conditions stayed severe throughout. After 3 weeks of waiting for a window that never opened, they descended. The mountain had given them nothing. The British expedition that same year was the most capable of the 4. Steve Barry led a team that included Jeanette Harrison, who would go on in 1999 to become the first woman to summit Kangchenjunga before dying on Dhaulagiri that same year. The team established base camp at around 5,180 meters, worked through the approach along the Mangde-Chu Glacier moraines, and navigated a technical feature they named Dinosaur Ridge. They put in 3 camps and reached approximately 6,880 meters. That is the highest point any human being has ever stood on Gangkhar Puensum. One climber had to descend with pulmonary edema. Another took injuries in a serac fall. Then, an early winter jet stream moved in and shut the weather window before the team could assess whether the route above their 3rd camp was even viable. Indian Army helicopters evacuated them out. The arithmetic across all 4 attempts is stark. The highest point reached was 6,880 meters. The summit sits at 7,570 meters. No team was ever positioned, under good enough conditions, on a confirmed viable route to make a genuine assessment of the final 700 meters. Whether the mountain is technically climbable in that upper section remains unknown. What is known is that 4 of the strongest Himalayan teams of their era went in and came back with nothing. Then, in 1998, a Japanese team obtained a climbing permit from the Chinese Mountaineering Association, planning to approach from the Tibetan side and sidestep the Bhutanese law entirely. Bhutan objected diplomatically. The permit was revoked. The team redirected to Liankang Kangri, a subsidiary peak entirely within Tibet, and from its summit looked across at the main peak. Their expedition report described what they saw as glittering immaculate. That observation, from 1999, remains the most recent close look at the summit on record. The ban on peaks above 6,000 meters arrived in 1994, 8 years after the last attempt. By then, the mountain had already delivered its own verdict. In 2003, Bhutan went further and banned all mountaineering in the country entirely, removing any remaining legal pathway to the summit. The closure that began as a threshold became absolute. The mountain had defended itself for a decade, but the permanent closure wasn't just a response to failed climbs. It was the first major application of a new national survival strategy. The 1994 ban didn't emerge from a single spiritual objection. It was the output of a national philosophy that had been under construction for over 2 decades, and understanding that philosophy is what separates the Bhutanese position from a simple cultural restriction. In 1972, Jigme Singye Wangchuk ascended the throne at 16 years old. Bhutan at that point had a per capita income of around $200 a year, no roads connecting its major valleys, and no television. From that starting position, the new king made a declaration that would define everything the country became afterward. Gross national happiness, he said, matters more than gross domestic product. That principle was formalized as policy in 1998. Then written into the Constitution of Bhutan in 2008. Today, every government policy passes through a GNH screening tool before implementation, assessed against 9 domains including environmental conservation, cultural resilience, community vitality, and psychological well-being. The climbing ban sits at the direct intersection of the framework's 4 pillars: sustainable development, environmental conservation, cultural preservation, and good governance. A hypothetical proposal to reopen Gangkhar Puensum for commercial climbing would fail the GNH screening on at minimum 4 of the 9 domain tests. The environmental impact of expedition infrastructure on a pristine alpine ecosystem. The violation of sacred geography as a direct breach of cultural resilience. The damage to community belief systems in Lunana and Laya. The psychological distress caused to populations whose understanding of safety and survival is directly tied to the mountain's spiritual integrity. The GNH Commission has blocked proposals involving construction through sacred sites. A summit attempt on the highest and most sacred peak in the country wouldn't clear a single threshold. The ban is not unusual within Bhutan's policy framework. It belongs to a list of consistent choices that runs across every sector of national life. The Constitution mandates a minimum of 60% forest cover at all times. Bhutan currently sits at 72%, with a third of total land under formal protection. The country banned pesticides, banned single-use plastics, banned tobacco sales. International fast food chains don't operate there. Bhutan is carbon negative, absorbing more than it emits. A daily sustainable development fee caps tourism volume by design, keeping visitor numbers deliberately low in favor of high-value, low-impact engagement. The mountain isn't an outlier in this list. It's another application of the same logic. The commercial argument against the ban doesn't survive contact with Bhutan's actual tourism model. The case that Bhutan is leaving money on the table by refusing Everest-style permit revenue assumes Bhutan wants what Everest has: permit queues, altitude garbage, fixed rope infrastructure, and the logistics of evacuating commercial clients who shouldn't be at altitude in the first place. That model would destroy the brand that generates Bhutan's tourism revenue. The country markets itself as the last place on Earth where development hasn't won. A commercialized Gangkhar Puensum dismantles that proposition at its foundation. Bhutan's economic calculation on the mountain isn't naive. It uses different inputs. The GNH framework also survived the end of monarchy. The fourth king introduced it. The constitutional democracy that replaced absolute rule in 2008 retained it as a core governing principle. Elected governments since then have maintained the climbing ban without interruption. This isn't a royal decree that a future administration could quietly walk back. It's a constitutional value with broad popular support, rooted in a belief system that is actively practiced by the communities most directly affected. The ban doesn't require a king to enforce it. The people it protects support it. There's a specific philosophical inversion that closes this argument cleanly. Mountaineers look at the summit record and see a blank, a gap, a data point that should exist but doesn't. The empty box registers as deficit. Bhutan looks at the same record and sees the achievement. The mountain is 7,570 meters. First surveyed in 1922. Still whole. The deity intact. The valleys protected. That is the record Bhutan is proud of, and it has been accumulating for over 100 years. The question was never why Bhutan won't let climbers in. The question is whether the mountaineering world ever had the right to ask. The unclimbed summit isn't a gap in the record. From inside the Bhutanese framework, the absence of a first ascent is the record. The mountain has never been desecrated. That is the achievement. Subscribe to Summit X for more forensic breakdowns of the decisions, failures, and belief systems that shape what happens on the world's most dangerous mountains.